Operationalizing the privacy compliance. Sorry about that. It's a topic that's kind of near and dear to our heart with kind of GDPR, the date for that coming and going, and folks still kind of working on kind of the best way to implement that within their operations. And then more recently, the California Privacy Act that was passed last month and what goes into effect in roughly 16 months, so not too far out. But we wanted to just get on this topic early on, start discussing it. We invited Daniel Johnson to come in today. He's from Venza Group. He's one of the co-founders over there. And Venza Group, that's, if you want to look them up, their URL is venzagroup.com. But they focus on providing consultative services for all things related to privacy. They focus on providing solutions and operational best practices for privacy regulation. And this encompasses everything from PCI and the different certifications that are there and what you gain from that, GDPR, and then the more recent California Privacy Act that was signed last month. So Daniel, welcome.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad you could join us today. It's always fun to bring in folks from the outside world who, frankly, have a lot more expertise in this area and present to our audience and give us some of the insights of kind of best practices and what's good and what we should be doing within our own products and services.
Well, I'm glad you guys are here, and I'm honored to be invited to be here and have a discussion, have a conversation about privacy regulations and hospitality. I'm assuming people can see my screen.
Yep. I think we're good.
Okay, great. So again, I'd like this to be a conversation. There's space at the end for questions. I've got a number of things I've prepared, and I do believe that the Navis team is monitoring the chat feature. So, and I've got that open on my screen if we want to look at that as well. So I will just forge ahead. Somehow it went all the way to the end.
Yeah,
we just tested that.
I'll add in, folks, that we will be recording this and we will be sending it out. So if you can't make it or you got to bounce out early, you'll still have access to it. And then we'll also try to save questions towards the end. But if something's particularly relevant to a slide or a piece of information, if it makes sense, we may interject that question. So if not, then we'll try to leave some time towards the end to address all questions.
Exactly. Okay, so I'll just jump right ahead here. So privacy regulations, for many of us in hospitality might consider it the essential topic of 2018. Lots of chatter about privacy. Some privacy regulation basics. Many of you may be more familiar with the GDPR than the California statute. So some of this may be repetitive. The regulation indicates that personal data privacy is a fundamental human right, so they place very a high degree of importance on it. It took a long while to develop. It is not the first accountability-based privacy law. I think Canada has that distinction from the early 2000s. By 2010, there were some 50 different national accountability-based privacy laws, so it's not the first, but because of a few things, the GDPR certainly has grabbed people's attention. Maybe it's the time of where we are with regards to big data. GDPR, in the EU, obviously representing a very large market. So a number of things have meant that the GDPR has really captured our attention and our imaginations. Penalties for non-compliance, many of you probably familiar with those steep penalties. It has certainly spurred on similar regulations. 1 week ago, the Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados Pessoais in Brazil was signed into law, was ratified, I guess, by the new president there. So that's coming into that'll come into practice in January of next year. And also, we have seen lots of chatter about the compliance levels kind of sputtering. There was a recent article that said IBMI shops are organizations that are using the IBM iOS are only at 50% estimated at 50% compliance. So lots of challenges there. I'm based in our Dutch office here in The Hague, so there's a considerable amount of conversations about where the data protection authorities are and the kinds of how much work they're doing. Just yesterday, the Danish data protection authority indicated that they're tracking to have to process some 20,000 different investigations in 2018. Compare that to less than 5,000 last year. So uptick all over the European Union with regards to investigations and a look at and activities around data protection and satisfying the GDPR. And one of the things that the Danish authority mentioned was the real challenge. They had a 30% increase in their staffing in order to take care of all of the widespread activity, data subject requests, etc. So they increased their team by 30%, and it was they are seeing that is woefully shy of what they need. So cyber professionals are in high demand globally, but certainly here on the European continent. You got a little symbol there in the corner, the HSD. Our office here in The Hague is part of the Hague Security Delta. It is a collaborative of organizations, businesses, universities, the government, in order to collaborate and build a stronger cybersecurity community. And just this week, they have their cybersecurity professionals training for people looking to enter this marketplace, and they had some 65 different people go through that training program, and it doubled from last year, and so you're seeing more and more high demand for cyber professionals. And also there's an article that I'm sure we'll be able to share afterwards, but an interesting article just from a couple days ago, or the 15th, on the unexpected consequences of the GDPR, opt-in fatigue. Some people are finding services restriction, especially here. U.S. websites not available because they're not available. They're not compliant to the GDPR, so unavailable to European market. So that's hitting organizations. Poor service, poor customer service as being a complaint. People feeling like they're not getting their answers from their vendors. But meanwhile, also seeing a greater kind of an uptick in meaningfulness with regards to relationship in that social contract between organizations and their their end users, and also a greater perceived value for organizations that are serving as better stewards of data. So that's an interesting article, and that'll be available for anyone that wants to check that out. Next. So a little bit on the California statute. The California law is made into law. Most people believe that it was rushed through. I think this is kind of interesting, rushed through in order to avoid some a November ballot, having it be on the November ballot, because most experts thought that having it be on the November ballot might be mean an even more privacy strong, less business-friendly version of the law if it went to the general public. So they wanted to make sure that they got that law passed. It goes into effect, just as Brett had said, on the 2020 and January 1. Big difference between this and the GDPR is, unlike where general individuals can reach out to a supervisory authority and ask to have something investigated, everything seems to hinge with the California statute on a data breach. So in the case of a data breach, then an organization can be brought into investigation to see if they're in alignment with the California law. So there's not to demonstrate how you're progressing, regardless of a crisis situation, which is the way the GDPR is. So that's a kind of an interesting delta between the two statutes. And the California, the CCPA, also applies to a variety of businesses. They did have a privacy law in place, but they've expanded this to include large organizations, so $25 million in turnover revenue in any given year. Also, any organization that is processing a lot of data, or organizations that depend on the selling of personal data as their revenue. So it applies to all of them. One of the things that's kind of interesting about the California statute that many people are critical of is it doesn't do a really good job of identifying who is a controller and who is a processor. It just references kind of service providers. And so that is something that you find in the GDPR, you don't find in the California statute. So you might be seeing some changes along those lines. New penalty also, pretty hefty penalty when you think of your typical data breach may have as many, in hospitality can have as many as 500 records. And so if you have a violation per record, you can have as much as $7,500. So it could get pretty expensive pretty quickly. So to be on the lookout for that. And also more that you may see additional fines as organizations that are doing a poor job with data privacy may also have fines correlated through the Unfair Business Practices Act. That's one thing that attorneys that are experts in California statute are suspecting that might happen. So we'll have a little more on that as we go on, but I wanted to kind of hit you with some of the big factoids, and then we'll move on. So we won't have all these big long screens full of data, or full of words as we progress. There are resources out there to help you with GDPR. I'm a member of the GDPR, the HFTP GDPR task force. So organizational flowcharts are out there available to you at gdpr.org. I'm also the co-chair of the HT&G GDPR work group. We are in our second phase. There was a GDPR for hospitality white paper that we launched in March, so I recommend downloading that. Valuable information for you there. All right, so from our vantage point at Venza, we think that looking at privacy and considering privacy is really a smarter strategic approach to doing business in this modern era. Big data is where it's at, and so embrace it. So there's a quote: "Privacy is a business enabler rather than a stumbling block." Why? It's ethical. It demonstrates value with your brand, and it builds trust. And it also can help you deal with, in the case of a data breach. All right. We think in terms of 6 considerations when you're thinking about privacy management and these regulations. First of all is consider privacy by design. That is a phrase that's used a lot in GDPR, and it is something that we think is just is a core principle of moving forward. It's not anything new. Wasn't created by the GDPR, but the basic concept of privacy by design is collection should be minimized, and your retention and your consent must be formalized. So whatever you're collecting data for, whatever those processes or those purposes are, must be very clearly outlined, and the collection of data has to be totally aligned to that purpose and nothing beyond that. Policies need to be adapted, need to be created, adopted, and you have to implement measures to minimize the value of that data, provide transparency. This is a big thing with the GDPR, especially when it comes to demonstrating what work you've done, and constantly monitoring what data you're processing and any kind of risks that are out there. That has a lot to do with your data breach crisis management as well, which we'll get to in a second. This is a model for the GDPR. Don't want to just be harping all about the GDPR here, but one of the things that I think is valuable about this model is that right there at smack dab in the middle is the controller. From our vantage point, all hotels are controllers. You are the ones determining the purpose for the processing of that data. And so working with your third parties, working with your data processing, you are the ones who have that relationship with the data subjects. And so you're smack dab in the middle. Lots of responsibility, but with that responsibility comes great opportunity to be a better data steward and have a better relationship with your customers.
Hey, Daniel.
Yeah.
Would you say that if you are GDPR compliant, would you then be considered compliant for the California Privacy Act and the requirements that are there?
Tough. In many ways, the GDPR is a more comprehensive privacy law. Mm-hmm. There are, just as Ed mentioned, there are some slight differences with regards to the things that you're doing around how you might consider processing data based on legitimate business interest. Here in Europe, we have a lot of organizations that are leaning quite heavily on legitimate business interest as a reason for processing data. That is not the case with this California statute. So how much you leverage that concept of legitimate business interest, there may be some other aspects of the California law that where that notion of I'm GDPR compliant, so I'm good with California. I think that's kind of dangerous territory for one reason alone, and that is because some organizations may lean on legitimate business interest as their validation for processing data, and that may not work, from what I understand, with the California statute.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So with regards to privacy by design, inquiries to demonstrate your privacy by design measures, you can probably expect that, even if people are not within the scope of the GDPR. Stateside, you see a lot of organizations that say we are compliant to the GDPR. So you can imagine in the zeitgeist of people are thinking, well, that's something that applies to me. I should be able to exact my rights under this statute. They may not be aware that it is a European law versus a U.S. law. So you can expect inquiries, how to respond, very clear policies, have leadership statements about where you stand with respecting privacy, and make sure that you keep logs of the work that you're doing. So data management is probably the first big step that organizations take in identifying, managing their data, figure out who has responsibility, who has access, and make sure you determine who's a controller and a processor. Again, this is one of those challenges with the California statute, because it does not create those clear definitions. That is something I think seems to be clearer and better with the GDPR. But it is an opportunity as a controller to review your third parties, make sure you're working with organizations like Navis that are doing right by their clients, to make sure they're doing absolutely everything to process data. This is a little visual that is your typical tech stack at a hotel. From our work, we have found that the greatest amount of personal data, sensitive data, and sensitive data, but in general, personal data seems to be hiding in a lot of these systems. So be mindful that you may have a lot of personal data in those systems when you're doing your data mapping exercise. Those are great systems to start, and also start reviewing your service level agreements with any third-party vendors that may be processing that data. Here's a look at that flow chart that that I had mentioned that the HFTP GDPR task force, all sorts of letters, HFTP GDPR task force had generated. So I was on the team that developed this kind of swim lane flow chart. And these are valuable tools, not necessarily answering questions, but rather helping organizations to ask the right types of questions and informed questions. You'll see which systems are involved. You'll see that the data is flowing through the organization. Sometimes hoteliers may not, one silo, one department may not be aware of how that data is touching a variety of people within an organization to a variety of different departments. Sometimes legal may not even be aware of that. IT may be aware, but maybe marketing isn't. So, these are tools that are out there, and we'll point out a couple items on that flow chart. With regards to data management, you can expect some pushback within your organization. Some people in marketing wanting to utilize data that's in a database, utilizing contact information, and then someone legal saying, "Don't touch that. We can't use that anymore." So you want to make sure that you that you have a very clear strategy. You can expect legal reviews between any vendors that are processing data. Maybe conflicts of interest, kind of mentioned that a little bit between, say, marketing and legal, and also some new definitions, and that's again referencing what your role might be against the California statute. So you may see some updates to that statute, new defined aspects that are needed. Another consideration, I don't think any webinar is complete without a Dr. Evil meme, so I included that.
Love it.
Rights of the data subjects is really important. That's important for the California statute and for the GDPR. Certainly, one of the things that just a recent article from Computer Weekly indicated that 31% of people have already begun trying to activate their rights over their personal data, and 55% plan to do so within a year. So you can imagine that you're going to see an uptick. We do a lot of work with some luxury brands over here, and we saw small number of actual data subject requests going from something like 10 per month to, say, 45 per month in the last couple of months. So you might think that's not 45 data requests, that may be manageable, but that is that's more than tripled from the month of April to the month of May, and you're seeing that compound. So you start thinking about 45 data subject requests every single month, and if they start to increase, you can see that could be a workflow challenge for any organization, especially any organization that wants to communicate with your guests in a way that makes them feel comfortable. So when we're talking about consent, when we're talking about data subject rights, consent is a big deal. It is a big deal in Europe. It's going to be a big deal for the California statute. It's got to be affirmatively active, action taken. It's got to be freely given, and it's got to be informed. Keep in mind that booking a hotel room is considered consent. You know what they're processing your data in order to get you that room. They have your information. You have affirmatively taken that action. It is for the processing of your data after the booking of the room that an organization needs to have some consent stacking, or consent strategy where you may be stacking that consent in a way and capturing it.
So just for clarity, you're saying with the transaction, there's a certain amount of assumed consent, but being able to market to that person post stay, then you need to make sure that you get another level of consent, ideally at the front desk or through some other type of email marketing or some other opt-in type of mechanism.
It could be post stay, it could be during stay as well.
Okay.
Yep. Great. That's something that's an important clarification, and actually that's why we included that in these charts, and the just zeroing in. I'll go back. Sorry, zeroing in a little bit. That that consent for other purposes beyond the booking of a room. So what to expect? You can expect data subject requests. You may have people saying, "Hey, I'd like to exercise my right to be forgotten. I just checked out of your hotel. I don't want people to know that I was ever here." Well, that doesn't necessarily float, especially with regards to legal requirements for law enforcement, right? That you have to be able to show that people, and should law enforcement request that people have stayed at who has stayed at your location. So one thing that you can expect is that the staff may be a little confused by some of these requests from people. So how do you respond? You got policies in place, you've got standard operating practices, you've done some training, they understand the value of privacy, they understand that protecting guest privacy is servicing the guests. That's part of being in the hospitality industry. Making sure that their data is safe is part of being hospitable. So how do you respond? You also might have a consent management system, whether that be a software system or some kind of workflow that your organization has identified. Organizational management, I think also SpongeBob is key for any webinar, but organizational management is the fourth of the six considerations that we want to forward, and that is that you need to be thinking about your team, communicating to people, figuring out your individual team and your larger team, who's doing what. Be thinking, if you have an organization that is beyond borders, which statutes, which regulations apply to you. Are you based in Mexico? You've got a Mexican law. Are you based in, do you have properties in Brazil? You want to make sure that your agreements and your policies, etc., are aligned to the new Brazilian statute, California law, most definitely. So you want to be thinking about your portfolio and make sure that your policies, procedures are aligned to local regulations as well. Awareness programs. It's a big deal for us at Benza. It's just going to be key to make sure that your team is aware of protocol and your particular policies. Now, the idea of a data protection officer is not part of the California statute, but that is certainly central to a lot of other privacy regulations, not least of which the GDPR. We think it's a good idea that you have someone in place that can be that go-to compliance officer, somebody that is overseeing your data protection initiatives within the organization. So can seem like that person may have to be a superhero because they're having to carry a heavy load on their back and balance many different aspects, being able to get people on board with the idea of privacy, respond to any kind of legal questions or with supervisory authorities, also be able to communicate and to an executive team, which, by the way, with the California statute, it's the executive team of the organization that can be held accountable. That's kind of par for the course with any accountability-based privacy law.
And this could be an individual person or a group of individuals, correct? It's just to make sure that you don't panic and you have some policies and thought processes put in place for the larger organization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be an individual, it could be a whole team. It's really kind of people that have kind of a director fiduciary responsibility for the organization.
Yep.
Yeah. So what to expect, accountability questions. Is it my problem? Am I going to be called on carpet? This just leads right into what your question there is, Brett. I mean, who's accountable? So you're gonna probably want your legal counsel to be able to answer that question. It could be conflicts of interest. If I'm going to be held accountable, I don't want marketing to do that stuff. And marketing saying, well, you can't hamstring my efforts. And so again, you're gonna have some potentially some real philosophical questions. What is it we want to do with this data? Who do we want to be in the marketplace when it comes to that? So how to respond if you got an organization that's across borders. You may need to have binding corporate rules and have clear divisions of labor. That may include creating some kind of data protection officer or some kind of compliance officer that can be the go-to person that can answer these questions. All right, so
for GDPR and then also for California, who is the enforcing body on this? And then how do you feel the executives will be held accountable? Can you add any color to that?
So with regards to jurisdiction of the Europe, we get a lot of questions from organizations that are in the Americas saying, well, what can they do? The European Authority, for example, certainly the GDPR falls within any kind of international law. So if somebody is engaging in commerce with Europeans, they're engaging in international commerce, and so breaking a law could have ramifications. Can you still hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
Audio's good.
Okay. So with regards to who would they be working with, potentially for some organizations outside of the EU, the suggestion is to establish a relationship with a supervisory authority, and in that way you can have kind of that one organization to contact. You don't have to contact the Danish and the Dutch and the German supervisory authority. So that's one way to help organizationally sort things out. For the California statute, you're dealing with the California district attorney, I suppose, and the statute does indicate that it is there to protect California citizens, the citizens of California, and so there is some question because from what I recall, when California statute 1828, I guess, is AB 1828, if I recall, with the sexual harassment and workplace harassment law, that soon started to apply to anyone that is having commerce or dealing with a California business. So that means someone that may have stayed at a California hotel, that may also then apply to them. They could have their rights protected under the California law. That is an area that I'm not an attorney, so I don't know necessarily how to define that. And I think those, from what I could tell, that has not been completely defined. But it's supposed to be protecting California citizens. They're residents of California. We'll see how that plays out. Does that answer your question, Brett?
It does. It does. I think I'd read it was either the district attorney or the attorney general. It'll be up to them in terms of how they want to prosecute on this. And historically speaking, they've been pretty aggressive from anything relating to privacy. So it's real. It's real here in the United States. And we look at it and we wonder, right now it's California. What state will follow California? Some people suspect potentially New York, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I mean, California as the world's 5th largest economy in and of itself. I mean, that's you can bet that it'll have pretty sweeping significance. So, getting into the crisis aspect, crisis management, a big deal for the GDPR as well as probably even more so for the California law. GDPR indicates 72 hours to notify supervisory authorities. I believe that's the same for the California statute. One thing that I think is important, if you have serious breaches that include sensitive information such as anything health care related, or if you've got information with regards to someone's national origin or sexual orientation, etc. Some of these things can be seen as extremely sensitive, and so if there's a data breach, be able to reach out to them. And within the GDPR, well, anyone processing data within the California law, but within the GDPR, keep in mind that it's processors and controllers alike that both have responsibilities. I want to deep dive a little bit here on the subject of data breach notifications. This is from Article 33 of the GDPR, and I think this is kind of valuable even if you are thinking more in terms of the California statute. There's an interesting thing here happening. So from Article 33, you're seeing the first 3 recitals within Article 33. I just want to point out some of what the meanings are here. 72 hours to notify supervisory authority. You've got to be able to explain your delays. It clearly shows that processors have obligations. When you make a notification, you have to tell them what data have been breached, who to contact if there are questions about this data breach, why that data are important, those data are important, and what next steps you're taking. So you need to do this in order to be compliant. Okay, so these are your basics for any data breach notification. I want to point out a couple of other things within Article 33. Number 4, one is that your data breach notification can be done in phases. So what that means is you can stack your consent, you can utilize and stack your communications in a way. So we're talking about stacking consent. You can build, if there is a notification, you can also utilize this breach notification as a way of stacking additional consent. This is a way that you can show, you can use this moment, a data breach, to your organization's benefit as a way of building more and more trust with your organization. And then the other one, number 5, is that the controller needs to document any personal data breaches. So this is a moment where you can see how important it is to have your privacy management, have a system in place to manage the privacy, have it whether it be systematically done in Excel or through a privacy management tool. But you want to make sure that you are stacking consent and you are capturing it somewhere. And just to show you kind of your good, better, best kind of stack there. You're compliant. To be compliant, you got to respond to a crisis with facts within the time. A better approach is to also do that. Have your responses done with prepared messaging. The best way to do it, though, is to communicate a culture of being a trusted data steward. So how you do that may involve not only having those prepared messages, but also in a way that you are, when you're reaching out to individuals, if you need to reach out to individuals, that you are getting their trust and gaining that consent from them. So with the subject of data crises, you can expect more data breaches. I like to reference 23, 24, 25, and 26. 23% of businesses in 2017 were victims of ransomware. 24 is a reference to the number of hours in a day. You see well over 1 million malware attacks launched daily. 25 is a reference to the 25th of May, which is the day of the GDPR. You're going to see more regulations. California is just an example, as well as the new Brazilian statute. You're going to see more privacy regulations coming down the pipeline. So that's what 25 stands for. 26 is the number of days on average that that organizations that were victimized by ransomware were compromised. So that could be a system offline. It could be all sorts of challenges, both on the IT side as well as the operational. So data breaches are going to happen, and so be prepared for them. Have plans documented, be able to demonstrate the work that you've done in order to, whether it be through your notifications or any kind of request from a supervisory authority, and empower your teams. We are in the hospitality industry. It's a very strong people industry, very labor intensive. Make sure your team can be your human firewall. Be on the lookout for nefarious activities. So that takes that takes awareness, and make sure you empower them. So that's kind of is leading up to the very last the last part of my prepared statements is that is the sixth consideration is going beyond compliance, going beyond just sheer legalities, thinking about consent stacking and seeing how privacy can be a business enabler, and that it can build greater trust. There's a lot about, because we talk about data, that people think about digital connectivity and they lose sight of the human factor. This is your organization is having a relationship with people, and so they frequently want to give their information to your organization in order to reap the benefits that your organization is offering. Embrace that social contract, but formalize it in through your consent stacking. Have a data strategy in place. Be thinking about how this is an opportunity to really manage your reputation. It's important to people. I often reference I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the grandma index. No one is famous until grandma knows who they are. I talk about my 83-year-old mother. She, up until recently, she didn't really know what it is that I and Benza do. And if somebody would ask what I did for a living, if friends of hers in the neighborhood, she'd say he's in computers. But maybe because of the Equifax breach, maybe because of Facebook, it's in the news. And so she's made a very I'm very proud of her. She's made it into the new century, and she tells people, well, he helps organizations with their privacy and privacy regulations. So she understands that now. And so if my 83-year-old mother is thinking about data privacy, you can bet that your average everyday person is thinking about it.
Absolutely.
So it's a way, if you're thinking about it too, it's a way for you to be more competitive. So what to expect, conversations about trust.
I want to touch on that real quick. The consent stacking, I think, is critical for people to understand that, because I think a lot of folks will look at it as saying, I have a transaction and they can check the box from consent, but we're all very, very focused on improving and providing the highest level of guest experience. That often includes personalization, and that often includes trying to gather information during the stay so that you can use that in the future to provide a better experience.
Yep.
All very valuable, but we have to make sure that we're, depending on how we want to use that information, that you're gathering consent along the way. It's not just at the reservations desk or during the booking. It's really needs to be part of the culture. So anyone who's going to gather information or has the ability to update information, has that that privacy kind of lens that they look at in terms of making sure they get consent.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to think that you're going to gather consent for all the data that you're processing for everybody on all the different guest experiences that you may have and things that may be offered at the property. And then especially if you're thinking resorts, you got excursions. Some people are going on them, some people are not. You're working with third parties for those excursions. And if you think you're going to get all that consent in one reg card,
right,
it's going to be guests are going to walk in and they're going to feel like they're going to be startled.
Yeah,
it would be a terrifying experience to have. I need your information for this, and have this paperwork, this bureaucratic mess at the beginning. It is not the welcome that we want to give our guests as they enter the hotel. So stack your consent in a way, in a way, and be able to capture it through a system, perhaps, that doesn't startle them, that makes them feel, wow, they've got their act together and they're looking out for my best interest. That's the takeaway. Not, oh my God, what are they doing with my data? This is terrifying.
No, absolutely. And I think it's just a great point because people forget about that sometimes. And we're all focused on providing the highest level guest experience possible. So.
Yep.
So I know
this should not be seen, being compliant should not get in the way of being hospitable. Correct.
Absolutely. Great statement. So we only have about 10 minutes left. I know you have a few more slides. We wanted to leave some time for Q&A.
No, I think I'm all done. Yeah, I think the only thing I had at the end was, there are going to be conversations, don't be a robot, be a human. How to respond, have crafted and skilled communications. Have this stuff thought out in advance. Don't go into it kind of ham-fisted, half-cocked. It's not a good idea.
I've told folks many times, when you're looking at trying to get consent, you think about your success rate. And if people are trying to do it through an opt-in email, your success rate is probably going to be single digits. You should try to build the culture and the context. And when you can do it during a conversation, you'll have a much, much higher success rate in being able to get that, and a better experience for the guest as well.
Yep.
So we had a couple questions come in. I want to touch upon them. If other folks have questions, feel free to use the GoToMeeting question box to input those. But someone had brought up earlier, for California regulation, does it apply to smaller companies? And it's those that are less than 50,000 records or less than 25 million in revenue, or having to do with, are they in the business of data sales, those types of things. Can you speak to that at all?
All I can tell you is what I've read in terms of the organizations that are affected. It's that it seems as though they've made a very clear kind of line in the sand: revenue north of 25 million, or processing of 50,000 records, or if personal sales of personal data is 50% or more of the revenue for that organization. Mm-hmm. That seems to be, if any one of those, and I would imagine a lot of hotels would fall into that category because of the processing.
Okay. Another question was, and I believe California has it as well, in terms of having the ability to see what data you have on me, making that request, having the ability to state that you can be forgotten, and also having the ability to control who you're sharing your data with. So, for the marketing folks that are out there, if a hotel is sharing its data with someone who does automated marketing, that may be an issue. Or it becomes a point where the guest can approve or disapprove of doing that. Do you see as this having like a major impact on hotels and their ability to kind of market to guests, either prospects or past guests?
No, I don't. I don't see it. I don't see it as a. I don't see the idea of being forthcoming with your data processing and just know where your data are as being an obstacle for an organ. It just seems to me that it's just good business. You want to know who your people are. You want to, it's a valuable asset to any organization, and so you want to take, if you care about it, you should take care of it. And so I think if an organization is taking care of that data and making sure that they are not just so the people have given that information because they want you to be, they want to have a relationship with you. And so yeah, I don't see it as a stumbling block as long as the organizations are doing right by their guests.
Right. As long as they're mindful of how they gather their data and whether they're getting consent and what they're doing with it. No, agreed, totally.
And then when people take issue with it, then they've got they have a plan in place for how to respond to that, and in a way it's not adversarial.
Mm-hmm.
It's that to me I think is key.
We had another question, and we've heard this before, which is, in the process of a guest raising their hand to say, can you tell me what data you have on me? How do you validate the legitimacy of that request and being able to say, is this person the person who they say they are? And then also when you're trying to pull the data, that you're only pulling their data in case there's more than one John Smith that's out there.
Yeah, well, one or more Daniel Johnsons, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Any guidelines or thoughts in that regard?
That's going to be that'll be tough for organizations that so much of it rests on the data mapping, and then what information that they actually give you. If they just give you their name, do you have a way of engaging with them in order to get their particular information so that you're not ferreting through other people's private information? Certainly not sharing something unless you've been able to validate it.
So you'd recommend in that request asking them to give more details than just their name? Probably state.
Yeah. Oh yes. I think you should have a data subject request form. I think it should be systemized. It shouldn't be just somebody contact Karen in the back office to look this up, and it needs to be formalized.
Okay, good. I think people struggle with that, because it's especially on the GDPR side where some areas they go very deep in giving information on policies, procedures, or what needs to happen, and then there's other areas where it's a little bit ambiguous, and that was one of those areas that people felt was a little ambiguous and made them feel uncomfortable.
No.
This is another question that I wrote it down because it came up earlier in other conversations. Someone had said, well, if I'm using a PMS for all my bookings, why am I considered the controller? Aren't they the controller? And I know that they're not the case, but I'll let you speak to it.
Yeah, as a hotelier, you are even if you are flying a brand flag, you're the one determining the purpose for processing data. It has nothing to do with where the data is housed. It just is the purpose and the one determining the purpose and means by which the data is processed. So if you've got a vendor, you've got a third party that you're working with, you've selected them. Now, there may be a situation where you are a joint controller with a brand. If you are strictly following all protocol and doing precisely what is determined by the brand, you may be a joint controller. But your relationship with the processor is one of controller your relationship to a vendor, to a supplier, is one of controller and processor, always. Because they're not telling you why you're gathering that data.
Right. The controller is the one forcing the request for information. So
that's right.
Right.
You want to have people, you want heads in your beds, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're the one, so I need to know that information about that person, and so I can put him in the bed. So I'm using this tool to process that information.
Great. One last question, and I know this one's a little bit hard, and I know because we've even debated it a little bit even prior to this. It's kind of the definition. And this is more from a GDPR perspective than California, but they're so tightly kind of aligned in many regards. The concept of kind of data subjects and who they are and when it applies. There's kind of the way the law was written, and then there's, well, how do we make things enforceable or audible or what have you? You want to speak to that, or?
Well, you're talking about our offline conversation about citizenship versus
location.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Minnesota. I'm an American citizen, but I live in Den Haag. So, if I book a room in your hotel in New York from here, you're processing data, across. I may be using your data processor. You have a relationship with a booking engine of some sort, perhaps, or I go directly to your website. So you're offering goods and services to me. I go to your website and I give my information. It doesn't matter where I'm originally from. It just matters where the data is processed from, or if those goods are being offered across.
Right.
So that's kind of the for that reason, I think it's really foolhardy for an organization to create separate data strategies and partition data from one group to another, and especially in the hospitality industry. I mean, if you were dealing only with the data from one source, if you're working with, you're in agriculture and where your produce is coming from, and it's always that, and that's the information that's maybe a terrible example, but hospital, you got people coming and going from all places, and you've got privacy laws in Canada and Mexico and now California. Why would an organization create a data strategy and then try to partition data, records? You want to market to your people, all your people. You want them to have a great experience with your brand, all the people that are walking into your hotel. So create a strategy that is uniform across, that satisfies what is now the most comprehensive law, which is GDPR. It just seems to me make sense to me,
right?
Because otherwise you've got, this is our database for these people. We can send that stuff there because we don't have to worry about consent there. It seems to me myopic. Maybe I'm missing something, but it doesn't seem to be. Why not create a comprehensive strategy?
For sure,
something that satisfies the laws and also, is thereby easier for your organization. But
it's going to get
in the world of CRM, I know that can get pretty damn complicated. So maybe I'm missing something.
No, that's right. It's going to get more complex and it is going to get easier, but having a macro strategy and starting to figure that out for what you can and can't do is it's the proactive element of it, of making sure that you're on top of it versus reactive. Unfortunately, we're past the top of the hour. I wanted to thank you for joining us today and coming and giving us kind of the insights and the perspectives of what your organization does and kind of the view of how you consult clients when they want to deal with kind of operationalizing the privacy side of their business. We will, for folks that have asked, we got a couple questions. We will be providing the recording and the presentation as a follow-up, as well as some other materials. So you will get that in an email. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us.
Very great. Thanks for the opportunity, guys.
You bet. Take care.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.